Okay, so hello and welcome everyone to Void Art Centre. You're very welcome here in the space this morning. It's lovely to see you all here. So my name is Zoe McSparn. I am the interim head of public programmes in Void Art Centre. So here in the space we do about 4 to 5 different exhibitions per year alongside an exciting public programme of events. So the exhibition that we have on at the moment is called Shazad Dawood, Leviathan, We Go Elsewhere. So alongside that exhibition for the public programme, we have decided to invite the lovely Easkey Britton along to speak about some of the themes that have been addressed within Shazad's work. So within his work, he's talking a lot about climate action, migration and mental health. So Easkey's work has fit in really, really nicely along with that. So just to give you a little bit of an introduction to who Easkey is, Easkey Britton is a surfer, writer, artist and filmmaker and coach and marine social scientist with a PhD in environment and society. A lifelong surfer, she was taught to surf at the age of 4, and she now channels her passion for sea and surfing into social change. Her promotion of female surfing in Iran is explored in her TED Talk, Just Add Surf, an award-winning documentary, Into the Sea. She is the author of several books, including Ebb and Flow, published by Watkins in 2023, which will be signing here in the gallery after the talk. But yeah, without further ado, I would just like to introduce Easkey Britton.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone. It's such an honor to be in Derry to share a little bit about my work and the synergies with Shazad Dawood's incredible exhibition and body of work with Leviathan, We Go Elsewhere. And to celebrate, I suppose, in part, my own book, Ebb and Flow, coming out, which I think has a lot of synergies and parallels and connections on those themes that Zoe mentioned around the climate crisis, our relationship with the more than human, especially with water, how we might overcome boundaries or barriers within our sort of human societies and relationships, and then also, of course, our own health and well-being. And I look at all of that through the lens of water. That's just the medium I'm most familiar and comfortable with. So for the session, I wanted it to try to be as active or interactive and immersive as possible. So I thought I'd begin with sharing some of my own kind of more creative work too. And the themes I wanted to really begin to unpack and explore with all of you is looking at that creative process and how to access things like our own sort of state of flow, our creativity, how that can be enhanced in particular with water, which is also at the core of the book. And then shifting gears a little bit to look at the complexity of that relationship we have with water in our societies and in our lives, especially the role of power, which I think is a very dominant theme in a lot of Shazad's work as well. So what I wanted to do is maybe riff off a few kind of creative elements. So the first I wanted to share with you is a lunar cycle, a short film I made back in, I think, 2018. But for me, the making of it, it's a 5-minute short, primarily around my experience of surfing in the northwest of Ireland. But it was really, for me, a jump-off point in terms of my own creative process of exploring more deeply that relationship in an embodied way with the ocean and how it's shaped my own sense of self and belonging, and looking at those more than human connections with phenomena like the wind and the water and the waves, and those encounters we have when we're in nature that can feel exposing, can make us feel vulnerable, maybe even uncomfortable, but the kind of transformation that can happen when we move through those experiences, or just be with them, even allow them to unfold around us. And how do we presence ourselves in those situations? So some of those themes will come up when you watch A Lunar Cycle. But I thought it was a great way to start, maybe as a jump-off point then, to begin to riff, hopefully together, on the creative process, how you access your own creativity, the sort of the blocks and the barriers that come up even in the process of my creative work and writing, and then really want to explore in a lot more depth this notion of flow. So making A Lunar Cycle was the kind of step 0 before I moved into my own writing. So my background is most of my training is as a scientist, and I'm trained in that way of academic way of writing. and creating knowledge. So a lot of the writing of my books then was kind of the unlearning of a lot of that, and different ways to access and creative expression. So there was a lot of work of having to, like, you know, how do I leapfrog my own inner critic? How do I bypass that over-analytical mindset that can come in the work too quickly and kill off a lovely creative idea? How do you stay with your imagination? How do you even awaken it? So the making of a lunar cycle, interestingly, I keep returning to it whenever I hit those mental blocks to begin to access my creativity again, because it was such an embodied experience. So I'll speak more to that afterwards, but for now, let's kind of immerse ourselves in the ocean for the next few moments or minutes.
Born on a new moon, on Galach Nua, in the darkness where beginnings take root. Our mother drew strength from the sea for both of us, breathing it deep inside, an ocean within. Heartbeat, breath, ebb and flow, a constant loving and letting go. Time felt through the body, the skin of the senses awakened, becoming part of its pure movement. Fluid flow lines ever forming, break open the shell of perception, the wave and mirror to what lies beneath. Lonely wildness stirs under storm-beaten skin, alive with the memory of a seabird. The hollows of the ocean cry out. The veil between seen and unseen thin. Colors bleed into each other. Through the fissures and the fractures, be with it all. In the deep silence of aloneness, breathe into the belly. Let go what wants to die. Let emerge what wants to be born. space between the waves, a net woven from solitude unravels. Suspended in the beautiful essence of isolation, a desire to go down into the depths within awakens. Fulla sail eg ardu. Life flows through life.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was, I haven't watched that in a while, actually. It was interesting to see. Brings back so many strong place connections with Donegal. Probably some spots you recognise there. Going back to the creative process, even the act of making this, so it's 5 minutes. And sometimes I've made short films in surfing where we managed to shoot the entirety of it in a day. And then this went on for, I think it was at least 3 months of trying to get the right conditions. And funnily enough, so much of it was shot through winter time, so not a single ray of sunlight. But trying to, it was all those times when we thought this is the day, and we put, in a way, when we gave it that energy that had too much push, that we've got to make it happen, this is our window, kind of the now or never mentality of that kind of the more masculine energy of let's get this done, get it nailed. It just never aligned, one thing or the other would go wrong. And it was those days where, oh sure, it's not perfect, we'll make the most of it, we'll just go in anyways and see what happens. Like that, the days we kind of let go of the agenda, that's all the footage we used in the end was from those kinds of days, all what we thought were going to be the in-between moments. And then the kind of golden glory days, it just didn't actually materialize. So on reflection, I found that really interesting, because of course that's what the energy we were trying to embody in order to have, I suppose, that authenticity. In order to communicate that, we actually had to embody it in the actual act of the filmmaking itself. We couldn't just try to edit that out or edit that together at the end. And so many of the themes in that, now watching it, I realized that they continue to play out in my work of the ebb and flow of our energy throughout our lives, throughout a day, throughout a year with the seasons, and of course the lunar cycle itself and the exploration in that of cycles in all its forms and the impact on our bodies, and in particular as women with menstrual cycle, tuning into the rhythm of that and beginning to sense actually that has an influence, of course, on my relationship with my environment. There's this exchange happening all the time, and so that's part of doing this, was to unravel the influence of all those wider cycles, of the energy in a winter, of a lunar cycle, and then following obviously my own inner cycle with my body's energy. So that constant state of flux, rather than being that sort of always on mentality. And I found part of the motivation for making it was recognizing within surfing, the surfing genre of, say, filmmaking and story making, it's very much through usually a male gaze from a male perspective, and predominantly male surfers that make it onto the screen. And a lot of it is also what I call kind of the surf porn. So all the sort of all the glory moments, all the most radical waves, the biggest barrels, and nothing of any of those spaces in between, which actually are what the surfing experience is all about. And that's just not the reality of what it's like for surfers in the water. There is this ebb and flow, there's the wading, there's getting battered by the elements, there's the missed waves even, and then there's all the waiting for that moment when it does all align. And so I just wanted to explore that from this much more, I suppose, cyclical way. And then what was interesting too, there's that scene where, there's so much in this. It's spoken word and poetry, it's surfing on one level, but then there's also that it's a whole, in a way, a movement practice. So looking at surfing as something more than a sport, but what about looking at it as an art form, as a form of dance, creative expression. And that scene where we filmed on the beach, actually at Tullen Strand in Bundoran, so that to try to capture some of that, the energy that's felt in the body of those times when things kind of build up, but it can get overwhelming, you know, when we feel like that we have to make the most of everything, but our energy is going in all kinds of directions. And how do you like bring that back and center yourself again? And I've had those experiences surfing. I really notice now the energy I bring with me into the water completely determines my ability to access that state of flow, what waves I'll get, how connected I'll feel. And that's something I was with big wave surfing in particular, where the consequences are so much higher, I really had to begin to tune into. So it was a process of attunement with my own body that then led to this greater sense of attunement with the natural world and with the ocean and the sea in all her moods. So that's what I wanted to speak to now in the chapter in the book called Flow. And there's so much written on flow, and it's synonymous with water. So what could I possibly say that would be in any way new or contribute to what's already out there? So I was quite stuck on it. I thought, I've got this. I know water, flow. I can totally write about flow. But that wasn't the case when it came to sitting down. I just didn't know where to start. That didn't sound cliched, or how do I access? So a lot of the shaping of the book was interesting with Ebb and Flow, very different to the process of writing my first one, Saltwater in the Blood. I had a kind of scaffolding and structure for it to follow, and that I wanted to look at these kind of key qualities or energies of water around like connection, power, flow, mystery. So each of the chapters are themed that way. And then I knew I wanted to also look at, I suppose, begin with my own experience of how have I experienced or embodied or encountered that particular quality of water in my life, to sort of take it from my perspective, to sort of start from there. Okay, this is where I'm coming from to look at it, and then from there invite in then the wisdom of other water experts, let's say, both more than human and human in the book that I've interviewed and had conversations with, to then enrich and deepen actually my own understanding of something, say, like flow. And then at the end of every chapter is a kind of invitation then to put that into practice, or different ways to help deepen that connection with water. And so the jump off point for the flow chapter, I actually went back to a lunar cycle and that scene on the beach, and went back to revisited the memory of it. Okay, I thought, what's the process I went through there? Which was really interesting, because I remember at first doing it just feeling really awkward and silly on the beach one morning at Tullen Strand. There wasn't really anyone else around, but it was just very hard to again shift. A lot of the book is also that, how do you shift from the head into the body, or from the head to the heart? And in my writing, I always notice those times when I get too stuck in my head, and yeah, it doesn't flow. So I find that in order to access a state of flow, it's always those moments when I move then from the head into the whole body. And to the heart. So I'll read just the beginning of that experience, flow. It is early, and the light from the slowly rising November sun is a pale glow, barely seeping through the blanket of grey-blue cloud that seems to soften the still air. The tide has withdrawn, leaving behind a slick, shiny residue of salt water, like a glossy glaze over the hard-packed sand that mirrors the low-slung sky perfectly. The cold, wet sand stings my skin. Instinctively, I try to pull my bare feet away, tiptoeing gingerly, as if trying to avoid sharp, broken shards of glass. I remember to breathe, and as my body softens a little, I slowly let my weight sink into my soles, the sand shifting beneath me. Soon the sensation of cold is gone. I can't tell if that is because my body temperature has adjusted, or if my feet have begun to numb. The 200,000 sensory receptors on the soles of each foot send mini electrifying shock waves from the sand through my body to my brain. flowing along a complex, tangled network of nerve pathways. This provides feedback about my environment, helping my body better read the shifting terrain, becoming more responsive to subtle changes. In traditional Chinese medicine, stimulating certain areas of the foot helps to release or balance energy flow in the body. It is quiet on this westerly facing beach on the edge of the North Atlantic, and I can't sense any rhythm or music that might help to guide my movement at first. I feel a little tense, so I close my eyes, breathe, and listen for the sea. The constancy of the rhythmic pulse of the breaking waves has a soothing effect, flowing over my body like a sound bath, and the chatter in my mind dies down. The pulsing white noise hum of the surf, fed by a light onshore breeze. So that was my entry point into looking at flow and connection, rather than starting with the analytical and the theoretical of like, well, what was my embodied experience of it? So, and then trying to put that into words. But what I wanted to speak to, and I think going back to like Shahzad's work as well, looking at very much those sort of more than human relationships in such beautiful ways. And you'll get a chance to see one of the films in his series after this as well. I was really reminded of this, of the concept of kinesthetic empathy, which some of you maybe are familiar with here. But I wanted to explain a bit more about that and about the importance, I suppose, of these. When we talk about embodiment, what do we actually mean? And how does that help us access a state of flow, and especially then the connection with water? How do you even begin to establish a relationship, through your body and beyond it with what sometimes is even hard enough with other humans, but how do you do that with the more than human world? So with other phenomena, natural phenomena, but also on other species, how are they informing and shaping our sense of self in the world as well? To actually create that sense of connection when we talk about things like nature connection. What does that actually look and feel like, and how do you even do that? How do you create a connection? So it is impossible to be in the here and now if you are not connected to your body. Creating new experiences in our body that counteract old or habitual reactions that have been conditioned into us by our life experiences, history, and even geography allows us to reconnect to our intuitive self. The embodiment of the movement of other animals or the more than human world can help to free us from the aching bonds of earthly ties and help us be in a state of receptivity, allowing the sound of the waves or the wing beats of the bird to flow through us. On the beach that cold morning, I wanted to move to find my flow. Tilting my head back, I looked skyward. A seabird, a fulmar, I think, crossed my vision, and I followed the invisible line it traced out toward the open water, its wings outstretched in an effortless glide before it banked into the wind. A moment of pause, and then it dropped, swooping low, circling around its outstretched wingtip. I moved my body gently and softly at first, as if I was testing my wings, my spine slowly unfurling, shoulder blades sliding up and out, fingertips grazing the horizon line. I was not alone. I had a dance partner. Reflected in the sheen of wet sand was my mirror image. She was all fluid. She was water. In the parts of our brain that sense feelings in our body, we have mirror nerve cells that fire whenever we observe the movements of others. This can lead to kinesthetic empathy, feeling what it is like to be the person you are observing. This does not just apply to other humans. We can extend this capacity to mirror and experience empathy in this way to other animals and even plants and natural phenomena, such as the wind and ocean waves. Kinesthetic empathy recognizes our kinship with all living things. It helps to explain why I felt so compelled to move in the way I saw the seabird moving, extending and bending my spine gently backward and unfurling my arms meant I was able to imagine what it feels like to be a fulmar for a moment. Ancestral movement expert Simon Thacker says we have an incredible ability to move our bodies in infinite and myriad ways so that we can mimic anything, even trees, water, rainfall, and waves. He explains how this stems not only from our evolutionary biology as a means of survival, but also from an ancient pre-language form of storytelling or physical theatre that helped our ancestors describe what we experienced in our environment through movement and mimicry. I wondered if there's a little bit more I wanted to share there, going to the fluidity and the water cycle and how it moves through us as well as our impact on it. But I wonder, does anyone take a pause and any responses or questions coming up so far to the creative process and flow states, or how's everyone feeling in their bodies right now?
Do you employ any kind of like breathing practices and stuff to kind of get into the flow state or calm your mind and stuff like that? And what types of like breath practice would you use?
In terms of breathing practices, yes, I wanted to share at the end of this session actually a kind of like a microdose version to access that kind of the so-called blue mind state, which would be how do you kind of intentionally access that inner state of calm, especially when you're in a, say, challenging situation, or like I used or applied in big wave surfing. And the breath is always the entry point, the beginning, I find, for me when doing anything. And if I forget that, then it all starts to go sideways. So always return to breath, which I think, Sue Michaela, that's wisdom you'd share as well, I feel. And just about, like, I suppose that water and the intimacy we share with it, it's interesting because it's kind of paradoxical. So I imagine so many of us here in the room have some kind of connection to it, or maybe you wouldn't be here, but we tend to think of it more in terms of the quote unquote wild waters, or the sea, or the rivers, or the lakes, but then maybe not so much the water that the journey the water has been on that we use to brew our tea or coffee, that nourishes and supports us, or when we have a shower in the morning or splash our faces at the sink, or so just that everyday connection with water in all its forms, and how that can teach us so much as well. So another short part I'll just read on that is that how the water cycle is not some abstract, neatly drawn graph with water moving in a tidy circular process, going on somewhere in the background to our human lives. In actuality, it is messy, dynamic, and entangled, with water replenishing, removing, and cleansing our inner fluid systems. We are permeable and our skin is porous, with all the water in our body being replaced 17 times a year. We have something like 30 trillion cells in our body that all need water and movement to communicate with each other to be healthy. As water protector Pat McCabe explained, water is flowing and being filtered through the body of every being, every living thing, and through the consciousness of all life across all time. Our bodies are connected to the watersheds and bodies of water that we live with and move through. All these waters have become part of us, continually cycling through us. To feel the sacredness of water, we humans must become fluid and feel our fluidity. If we are fluid, we are harder to control and less controlling. On the beach that November morning, as I moved, I began to sense the water in my body and imagined how it would like to move, becoming a breaking wave, swaying, rippling seaweed in a rush of tidal water, rising and falling with each breath, toes tracing circles on the sand, ankles, knees, pelvis, spine, ribs, shoulders, arms, neck, head, and eyes, all followed, spiraling like a moon shell. Moon shells found washed up in the tide line once belonged to sea snails. They are round, glossy, and with a perfect spiral winding outward from the center of the shell, the still point in the eye of a storm. My internal process began to shift, and I felt newly unearthed emotions surfacing from some hidden depth, a dance of contraction and expansion. So I find it incredible too to think about with just even that notion of the water and how we are bodies of water. So much of us, I think, anywhere from 50 to 70% throughout our human lives, where we are actually composed of water, but that water is constantly cycling through us and everything else. So the drop of water in my body right now may have been in your body or will be in your body, and also that it's been here. It's one of like the oldest elements on Earth, along with rock, fire, water, is as old as the Earth. It's older than the air we breathe, and it's older than the soil and the ground, which is remarkable. And so all the water that is here now is all the water that has ever been. And I find it kind of mind-blowing when I really let my mind sink into that. And even how there's recent research being done to look at essentially what that speaks to is this ecological entanglement we have with all life, the interconnectedness with all things, which of course is inherent in wisdom traditions and indigenous worldviews. But that now kind of quote unquote new science is kind of catching up and also realizing the same thing. So it was tested to see how long a drop of water in, say, a person in Ireland, how long would it take to show for that same water to show up on the polar opposite side of the world, so let's say New Zealand. I don't know the full ins and outs of how they did this, mathematically speaking, but essentially then it took just 6 months for the water to cycle that far to show up in. So a drop of water in my body right now maybe will show up in a river or a plant or someone else in New Zealand in 6 months' time. So when we talk about we are all connected, we are literally all connected. And so the consequences too of our behaviors and actions and how we're living here or in any other point in the planet is literally touching everyone and everything else. So I find it profound when it comes to also then how we look at things like the climate crisis and all these other issues that might seem removed from our own lives personally, but actually realizing no, it's all one and the same thing. And in the book, where am I at for time? And in Shahzad's work in particular, he looks at that juxtaposition and the connection and link between things like the conquering of nature and how it's connected to the conquering of lands and the oppression of women, indigenous people, and other minorities, and that those things are linked because they're, I suppose, feeding the same beast or the same system of one of extraction, of colonialism, of that power over, the dominance of power, a power over kind of relationship in so much of our society. And so as I was writing the book, I kind of expected it to be leaning much more towards, as a lot of the writing is around so-called blue health, about the wonderful healing powers of water, of course, the positive health benefits, especially for psychological well-being. But I realized as I was unpacking all of this, you can't talk about our relationship with water without talking about power. And so there's a whole chapter on that in the book. And of course the power of water itself and that kind of the relationship we've had with it throughout our human history of trying to have power over it and the consequences of that. And that we really see that play out very powerfully when it comes to the movement of people and human migration, especially when people are seeking asylum and refuge. And how I thought it's interesting there, I suppose, how the paradoxical nature of our relationship with water, how it can offer such a profound sense of connection, but also can act as a real and literal barrier to freedom for so many. How these sort of blue spaces for healing can also be blue, what are being called as blue deathscapes. So you have somewhere like the Mediterranean Ocean, which is synonymous with beachside holidays, and now is actually becoming a mass graveyard of thousands and thousands of people whose names we might not know, but there are loved ones who will never forget their names. And so in the book, I kind of look at that, and it's taking a dark turn now, but I struggled with the balance in the book of, for me, none of it is framed in without hope, but it's just really important, I think, to acknowledge the complexity of our relationship with it. And that so much of how water is and what is unfolding in these water spaces mirrors what we are holding, in terms of our values and stories that we're living by within our societies. So it's a really powerful, I suppose, I find, a mirror, quite literally, to how we are as a people when it comes to water, and the quality of it hinges entirely on the quality of our relationship with it. So I wanted to read a short piece from that, and then it speaks to so much of my work and what I'm interested in is also the power of water to heal, and especially when it comes to and I think the power of water to heal comes from the fact that we have this complex relationship with it, that it is equally also a place of danger, of unknowability, of risk, of fear, of loss. And it reminds us the importance actually of being with those uncomfortable or more challenging feelings as well. And that's where actually a lot of the transformation can happen, if we can be held in a safe way in these spaces. And I can speak more to that at the end. In the book, there are also examples of that transformative power by working, with people who maybe had traumatic experiences related to water, and how healing can still be found through it. Physician and trauma expert Gabor Mate said our trauma is linked to our power over relationship with the earth, and our extractive industries are a form of addiction that will destroy the planet. He argued that our disconnect from the body of the earth mirrors the disconnect from our own bodies, which manifests, for example, in our anxieties, depression, and addiction. The belief in the earth as something separate from us has a lot to do with patriarchal domination, he wrote. This feeds a reductionist response to healthcare where treatment is restricted to biological pain. Instead, when illness comes along, it is here to teach us. The body has a message, and so too does the water. And Mate urges us to ask, what is the teaching? I'm just conscious of time, but and wanting to leave time for a bit of conversation now. But the book I go on then also to look at too, that we have this really dynamic relationship with water, and how, for example, there's so many rivers and water bodies that are associated with powerful feminine deities. It has that strong association with more of that sacred feminine energy and power. And then the consequences, of course, of our attempts to, and some of them are very successful, to control water bodies and conquer water, and the oppression over nature is then also so synonymous again with it's actually in a way used to break that connection with the sacred or with that more feminine energy. And then just looking at how, even then I talk a little bit too about, in the context of obviously with the slavery and the Middle Passage and crossing the Atlantic and what the ocean represented there and what it still holds, and that Christina Sharp, an amazing African-American scholar, writes a lot about this and uses the concept of wake to describe how there's still this kind of repercussions and ripple effect of the system and mentality that allowed something like that to happen is continuing in different ways in our society today. But how, for me, the kind of takeaway and teaching partly there is how we are all bodies of water. So the harm and oppression done to our bodies and to others is not separate from the ecological degradation and harm done to water bodies. So for me, that speaks to the power that comes from restoring our relationship with water, especially by creating a more reciprocal relationship, having that power with really kind of when it comes to even going for the swim, which I hope you'll join me on later today, the difference in how we show up in that space of, even asking permission before taking or receiving some of the benefits of when I go surfing or swimming, and just acknowledging and naming maybe my intention, and then taking a moment to listen and tune in both to myself and to the water that day. And sometimes I found that it's actually not the right day. It's not the day to go in the water. So it's, you know what anyways, I don't know if anyone else has sensed that. But that was a really kind of profound learning for me as well. So it's, again, just being aware that there's always an exchange taking place, and in particular with water, because as a molecule, it's so incredibly unique in how it responds to everything around it and to other bodies that enter it. So that's a whole other story, but I wanted to maybe just leave it there, and that we could open it up for some Q&A for a few minutes. Zoe, what do you think?
So I just want to say thank you to Easkey.
And at the very end, before we break for lunch, I will do that very short breathing visualization. It's like a 3-minute kind of hack version. Haven't forgotten.
I just want to say a huge thank you to Easkey for such an insightful talk. As she said, it's not over yet. So we'd just like to open the floor out for some questions. So if anybody has any questions, just pop your hand up, and Easkey will be able to respond.
I wanted to ask just about what you said there at the end about asking permission of the water, or setting your intention, and then knowing actually today is not the day to go in. Is that like, is it kind of like something you've learned over your life, or like how did you learn that, or what kind of, how do you know it's not the day to go in? Like, your intuition, is that what it is, or is it a conversation you have, or?
Yeah, such a good question. And I still don't fully know the answer. It's like that power of discernment. And then how do you discern the difference between it being like a fear of, maybe attached to a story in my head of why I shouldn't go out, or, talking myself out of something. So the fear, letting the fear kind of get in the way, and that being the why I don't go in. But that's very different then to this other, I suppose the power is in discerning the difference, right? And for me, that comes again through, like I said at the beginning, that going back into the body, finding any kind of way to get out of the head and access the body, so into your sort of more feeling, sensing state. And of course, when I say head, body, I mean even that's creating a duality that doesn't exist. So the mind is in the whole of body, and so I see it as a body-mind really, rather than a duality. But what happens is there's already that separation, and maybe, for example, with big wave surfing, there's been days where I've gone out and I haven't taken time to sort of first just breathe and listen and sense how my body is and where my energy is at. And when I have done that, those are the days where I just remain open to possibility, but without any expectation. And then I kind of just try to stay as in the present moment as possible and follow that. Versus the other days where I don't do that, and I'm kind of a bit gung-ho and kind of charge out, and then I find myself all of a sudden in a situation where there isn't an alignment, and I just feel it in my gut, like it feels off, or I feel this kind of pressure to perform. And then I, on reflection, realize, that's because I just didn't take that pause before leaping in, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's subtle, but it's quite powerful, and it's something that you can actually practice. So the more you do it, the more you're able to discern, is this, this voice in my head going, you're not good enough to do this, or the inner critic or the doubts kicking in, which also can hold a powerful message, or is this the feeling of in my intuition, in my gut, fact, today is just not the day. The invitation is not there from the water. Yeah, so it's first beginning, I suppose, that attunement with body, and then extending that out to begin to also learn to listen to the water. So it's both.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you're saying that. I'm kind of also hearing a separate thing of that's how to maybe deal with creativity. Mm-hmm. Like that's a physical thing, a body of water, something physically you're doing, but also if you're trying to be creative, maybe it's to approach it the same way.
Yeah.
Something, just kind of see if it's there for you that day or not, or that moment.
Yeah, if it's available to you, and it's that like the push-pull energy, isn't it? Of am I sort of trying to force an outcome here too hard, and then just need the best thing then to do is actually to do nothing, to just step back and go, okay, and do something maybe completely different, and then allow it almost to come back around of its own accord in terms of that creative energy, which takes trust, because you're like, no, what if I lose it and it'll never come back? Yeah. So thank you. Really, really great question. You got me thinking now.
Sorry, man.
It's just a quick question. How much do you think the sort of being in a state of flow is connected to joy? So just looking at, some of the pictures you have there, you're clearly, just absolutely loving what you're doing. There's lovely expression. And I'm just wondering, do you feel like that sensation of joy is very much when you've got into the state of flow?
Oh, lovely question. It's like what's coming up for me in response to that is like how we make ourselves available to joy, for that expression to come through. Because there's times when I realize I've probably been blocking my own joy because I've been a little bit too caught up in maybe the analytics of like, oh, I need to catch a big one today or whatever it might be, but it always comes through again. It's like when I let that go. So I find it hardest to access that when I was competing as a surfer through my professional career. And I know when looking back now, I can see the pattern of the moments when it did all align. Whether I won or not, but when I felt that flow state, which is incredibly hard to access in a competitive environment where you're being literally judged and you're on a clock, and it's so weird. But it was those moments then when I was able to actually allow, make myself available to that feeling of why I was out there doing it in the first place, which was knowing, oh, this gives me joy. I just need to tap into that and feel that, and the rest will follow, rather than trying to think I need to do this kind of turn followed by that turn to get that score. That doesn't work. So yeah, I think you're right. It is, and maybe it's a two-way thing, isn't it? Of but really allowing myself in those situations where you think, no, this is serious, I've got a job to do, but actually no, just letting go, just be with the feeling of joy, and then the flow and everything else, the performance part actually comes from that. Yeah, really great question. Very thought-provoking. And did you have and the one down the back, yeah.
I just want to ask, where did the attraction start? Was it the sport or the water?
Oh, great question. Definitely with the water. I mean, I didn't even think of surfing as a sport because I got into it so early on. I was born into it. So my parents were surfers, and I learned to surf in Rasnaula. But it wasn't like, it was just, surfing was just another way of being in the water, of learning how to play with waves, essentially. So it was all just about that, of learning about water and how it made me feel, and be that, rock pooling or lying on a piece of foam or trying to catch a wave, or so the doing it as a sport kind of came much later. So it's nice. It's lovely now because I can always go back to, that's the foundation. It's this connection with the water, and then accessing that in different ways as I kind of move through my own life cycle. So that it doesn't always have to be with a surfboard or in big waves.
So as a surfer and a marine scientist, have you ever found yourself that you got sick from polluted water? I think, because I know I was going to surf myself, and I've often found myself in pretty frothy water at times, using it rubber. Have you ever got ill as a result of it?
Yeah, of course. Unfortunately, yes. And that's the thing. We talk about ecological entanglements. So all of who we are ends up in the water, the good, the bad, the ugly. And increasingly we're facing that situation with the declining water quality right around the time when people are really finding this reconnection with water again. So, and it's a serious issue. So there's that real trade-off then. How do you make that choice as, it's your passion and you know how good it makes you feel? And I've done it where I know this water is is not clean and it's polluted, but the surf is pumping, and I'll just go out and I won't wipe out and I won't swallow water and I'll drink a can of Coke afterwards. But it's really nasty, isn't it? And it's deeply troubling, but it's increasingly what we're having to face. And it is, for me, what gives me hope is seeing, especially in surfing, and I think it's there in swimming as well, that there are lots of examples then of that more collective action. I would like to see more of it in Ireland, but they're coming together on these issues. So you have things like Surfers Against Sewage, Save the Waves International. I'm on their board, but even the fact that we live in a world where waves need saving is kind of mental. But yeah, and the Surfrider Foundation, and so I think all of that really matters too. But the answer is yes. And locally, I've experienced it. I've even been at the European Surfing Championships where they had to shut down the whole event in the beach because of runoff. It's in the Canary Islands. That's increasingly going to be a problem too with more extreme weather events. But the flood waters were so intense that it just everything overflowed and washed into the ocean. So we couldn't compete for a few days.
Yes, you trained for coming into danger in water, and do you do breathing techniques? And have you come to any, especially big wave surfing? What do you do to just let it to run with it?
Yeah, great question. So maybe I'll take this question, and then that's a perfect segue into doing the short kind of breathing practice / visualization. So I find when I first got into big wave surfing, now maybe back in the late 2000s, around early 2010s, so a while ago. And I found that the psychological state was far more important than, the physical mattered as well, but that would wherever my head was, that would really determine how the session went. And that's when I kind of really started to lean on a mix of more mindfulness-based practices to find ways to calm my inner state, and then also breathing. And a lot of the initial breath work I did would have been training that freedivers would do, and then for big wave surfing, you want to be able to hold your breath for as long as you can in case you are caught by one of those huge waves, which will inevitably happen at some point. And in a way, it was looking at what can I control and what's beyond my control. So I have, getting anxiety building up because of the anticipation of what the conditions might be like, how big the waves might be, how strong was the wind going to be, and so all those things that I don't have any control over. But then my own sort of inner state or inner weather pattern, realizing actually I can be a lot more, mightn't necessarily, maybe control is not the right word, but bring awareness and consciousness to that so that I can understand better how it's going to interact with the external weather on the day. And for me, that was through, breathing practices, especially. So what I wanted to share now is just a really simple way to connect with the body through breath, but also connect with the water in our bodies and around us. And I think the best starting point is always to first actually just simply be wherever you are right now, not changing anything at all, just to notice your body. So bringing your awareness to your body ever so gently to notice any feelings or sensations physically in or on the body. How is it doing right now? Feeling the seat underneath you. And just taking a moment to be with your body without any judgment. And just being aware of any of the feelings and sensations that are there. The emotions and the energy and where that's sitting. Any tightness or tension. Just noticing the body, your body, and how it's doing in this moment. time, shifting your awareness to your breath now. Just breathing naturally. Noticing the rhythm of your breath. And on your next inhalation, following the breath into the body. And feeling the breath as it moves through your entire body. Feeling that sense of expansion as you breathe in. That pause and the sense of release on the exhalation as you breathe out. And just follow the ebb and flow of your breath as it gently moves into and through your body. Feel the breath rising and falling like a wave. And following the next inhalation into the body, into your lungs, where this beautiful exchange is happening. Where your lungs are receiving oxygen-rich air, transferring it into your bloodstream. And the water in your body is carrying this oxygen to every single cell, providing you with energy, nourishment, and life. And on the exhale, the water of your body cleansing every single cell, removing the waste, and exchanging CO2 for oxygen in your lungs. As you breathe in and out. This beautiful exchange happening in your body of water. Just taking a moment to be with the pulse of water moving through and around your body, energized by the breath. And on your next breath, just extending your awareness gently outward, beyond the skin of your body. Becoming aware of all the other bodies of water next to you, around you. And extending your awareness a little further outwards to sense the body of water that is the river Foyle, flowing constantly past us, also continually renewing itself. And on your next breath, allow your awareness to ripple out a little further, following the river out into the estuary, the mouth of the Foyle, and out into the Atlantic Ocean. And on your next inhalation, acknowledging the oxygen you're breathing in comes from the ocean. Take a moment to receive your ocean breath. Turning once again, noticing the ebb and flow and rhythm of your breath. Gently moving your body. And just taking a moment to notice now how your body is feeling. If you notice any changes in the feelings and sensations from a few moments before. And perhaps all together, we'll take a slow, deep, gentle breath into our bellies, through our noses, and sighing it all out. Bringing some movement back into the body, moving the water and the breath inside us. Perhaps stretching up and out. Have those cells waking up a little bit. But yeah, let's think of that as a blue mind microdose. So blue mind being the antidote to our red mind stress response, but also enhanced whenever we connect with water. And an example of how I get asked so often, but I don't have, water near me. I can't get to the sea. I live in a city. How do I connect with water? And that's one way, remembering that we are water. So thank you. Good overtime.
So I think that's a really lovely note to finish on. Thank you, Easkey, for such a fantastic talk. I don't know about all you, but I certainly feel a lot lighter after that little mindfulness and visualization exercise. So thank you so much. I just want to give her another round of applause.